So after I make 3D prints with resin, I take the prints and put them in an alcohol bath and it washes the excess resin off. Now that resin stays in the alcohol and it does solidify if you hit it with some UV light, like you take the thing outside and let it sit for a while, but it goes and silts down to the bottom so it falls out of the solution. And I need to separate that stuff from the alcohol. I've tried filtering and coffee filters don't work very well, so I'm going to try a siltation tube, which I'm going to make myself. I got a piece of 3-inch PVC pipe. I paid lots extra for the clear stuff. You don't really need clear stuff unless you want to see what's going on inside. So I want to look inside to see, when the stuff has fallen out, and I can empty it off the bottom. If you watch my video, hopefully I'll be able to tell you, hey, wait X number of days and you'll be good to dump it out. So I've got a cap. This is like 10 bucks. You don't need the super heavy duty cap. You could do with a small lightweight cap because it's just to prevent the alcohol from evaporating too much. And then I got for 8 bucks the down converter because I don't want to have a 3-inch ball valve on the bottom of this. I want a smaller valve. So I went to a 1.5 inch here. And what that 1.5 inch is going to let me do is use this relatively inexpensive $12 ball valve. And of course I have to buy a piece of 1.5 inch that's going to connect these two guys. So I'm going to cut, just an inch or two off of here to put this on the bottom. And so by putting all this together with some solvent glue for PVC, I'm going to have a tube that can process a gallon of isopropyl alcohol and let all of the resin silt down to the bottom. When it's all at the bottom, I can open that ball valve for just a little bit and pour off the alcohol that has all the resin in it. And then I just have to separate a small amount of alcohol from that resin. Now I am going to need to mount this tube permanently vertically upright so it can sit for days. So I have 3D printed some parts. This guy goes underneath that 3 to 1 inch adapter. This guy goes around a 3-inch pipe so I can hook these to the wall and mount that guy permanently. These guys are available on Thingiverse if you want to find them there. I've posted them. So yes, I know the gray stuff's supposed to be used for conduit and not pipe, but my pipe cement is solidified in my can and I don't want to go to the hardware store, so we're going to make do. So the only trick here is you don't want to get any cement on that ball valve because otherwise it might cement the ball valve and keep it from opening or closing. So I'm going to put cement in here and then push it down on here so gravity will mostly try to pull the cement down. I've also set this guy up so that the marks are kind of on the sides, and this is going to be my front, so I'm trying to keep the front somewhat clean looking. So after verifying that the ball valve still works, we can put this on the expensive pipe. Now you might be asking, hey, where do you get that clear primer? Well, I didn't. It's just my purple primer is just as old as my cement that's solidified in the can, but all the purple has fallen out of it, so it's clear basically. I'm trying to keep drips from going anywhere, so I'm trying to put primer on this stuff and then let it go down, just to keep the outside looking nice. Alright, so that's how you build a siltation tube that'll process a gallon of isopropyl alcohol. So ideally, you could put this guy on the ground and just dump into it, but I got this junk here. So I need to make sure I have enough room to put this guy here so that I can have room for the ball valve to dump into this thing. I'm using 2-inch long deck screws, and I figure those are going to stick out a decent amount here. Now you want to make sure you leave enough room on the top for the cap when you mount this guy, but otherwise you want it pretty much as close to the top as you can get. Now you could put more than one of these along here, but most of the weight of this guy is going to be supported by that guy there. And I printed this in ABS plastic. I have a gap here, so I'm not putting a screw in that bottom hole, but basically I'm counting on these 2 decking screws to hold the 15 or 20 pounds of the alcohol and the PVC pipe in here. Now we just drop these captive nuts into those slots, and we'll have to push them down with a screwdriver to make sure they're all the way down there and lined up. So I've set this top guy up very loose. I haven't tightened it down yet. I'm going to slide the tube in from the bottom up here, and this will hold the top while I'm setting up the bottom. So this cap is just friction fit on here, but as you push it down, there's air pressure building up in here. So if I wiggle a little bit, you can see it kind of bounced there. So if you really want to go down all the way, you can turn the knob, push it all the way down, close the valve, and now there's a little bit of vacuum in there. So this seals moderately well, just friction fit. It will hopefully hold in the alcohol vapor, keep the alcohol from evaporating. If you're not familiar with ball valve handles, going across the pipe means the flow is blocked, so you definitely want to have it this way before you pour stuff in the top. Alright, if I didn't have those garage door sensors, I would have lowered this down a little bit, because right now I'm going to have to reach up a bit to pour the gallon into the top. I'm probably going to have to use a funnel or something. I also have the garage door things getting in the way, but this is my best place I had for mounting it. So assuming you keep this indoors with a good UV blocking set of windows, you might want to take it outside and leave it outside for an hour or two just to make sure all the resin has a chance to be exposed to UV light and solidify. You could also put it in a curing station and cure your resin mixed with the IPA alcohol if you'd like. Now it does silt down into the bottom of one of these containers. I just found it's really difficult to get the alcohol off without getting the resin, because it's super fine, and any type of suction or like a siphon action just pulls it right up. So let me turn this on. You can see it in there. So I'm just spinning all this stuff around so it'll be suspended, so that when I pour it in the tube, I'll know that it's all coming off the bottom and the cage and all the stuff. Alright, you can see how cloudy that alcohol is with the resin, the solid pieces of resin or little particles of resin in there. This container has nice rounded corners, so I'm going to just try pouring it in here, but first I'm going to get a step stool. Alright, just having a 1-foot step stool helps a lot here, so definitely mount this as low as you can get something comfortably underneath it. Alright, I could have used a funnel there, but it went alright. So just a tiny little bit spilled while I was pouring that. The majority of it went in here. I have a 48-inch pipe, and my calculation said a 36-inch pipe would be plenty for a gallon of isopropyl alcohol. I've actually gone here. It looks like I'm closer to 26 or about 26 inches here. So you probably want 32 inches, including the volume in that down converter and the top of the valve here. So, you know, I'd say 4 foot's good. 3 feet would probably work for a gallon. Now you can clearly see how, you know, the silt is all stirred up and it's suspended in there. I got the clear tube, and I paid a lot extra for a clear PVC pipe so I could see this and watch it and kind of judge when it was done. You probably don't need to do that, because I'm going to be showing you how long it takes, and so if you just pour it in and then wait the set amount of time, you should be good. So it's not necessary to see this, it's just useful for me. It's about an hour later and there's still stuff suspended. Been 20 hours. And the column of alcohol there is quite clear. I'm going to let it go for another day just to make sure, but I think 20 to 24 hours might be enough for all this sediment to drop out to the bottom. It's been 47 hours since I poured the alcohol with the resin in, and it looks like all the silt, the resin, has gone down to the bottom. So I have set up a glass jar, precariously balanced on some boxes, with a little bit of tape to keep it from sliding around when the alcohol splashes down into it. I'm going to be wearing a face mask because I'm not quite sure how much splashing this is going to do. I have a kind of a head above it to give some pressure. And the question is, can I open and close this valve fast enough so that I get the silt into the glass jar without getting too much waste alcohol in there? So we're going to give this a shot and see how it goes. We're going to go for a two-handed open and close real fast. Let's see how it goes. 1, 2, 3. Well, I have a whole bunch of silt in that jar. It's very white. I don't know if I got it all, but I have a lot. So I'm going to change out my jar and do another shot and see how white the second shot is. Now, as you can see, there was a little bit of splashing. Nothing hit my face mask, but there was a little bit of wastage here. So after the first shot, the alcohol up here is definitely still clearish. It's looking a little bit cloudier down here, so it might be the turbulence when I open that thing, and it might have sprayed a little bit of silt up into the alcohol. So if you really wanted to do this right, I think what you'd do here is you'd wait another day or two to let it settle down again. I'm impatient. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do another shot and see how white the alcohol looks when I do a second shot of this. So I was a little worried that I'd have this whole thing fill up really fast, but it looks like, you know, with a whoop whoop, it just did about that much. So I don't have to go quite as fast as I did the first time, I don't think. Alright, that is not as white as it was last time. There is still definitely silt and resin in there. Alright, so when I opened the valve here, I saw a bubble go up the tube, and I realized I really should be removing this top cap before I do this so that air comes in and it's not sucking air up from the bottom. Because when you suck air up from the bottom, any silt in there is going to go whoosh and get pushed all the way through the thing. As a matter of fact, there's probably a little vacuum in here. Okay, we're going to let this sit another day to 2 days before I drain any more out of this. And when I do it next time, I'm going to have that cap off, so hopefully the whole column of liquid can just go straight down. So here's a comparison, the first shot I did and then the second shot I did. So there's a lot more resin sediment in there than in here. So I'm definitely draining out a lot of resin on that first bit. But as I said, I'm going to wait another day or two and then do another one. So the question remains, what do you do with the resin in this alcohol? Can you filter that out at all? I haven't had much luck with coffee filters in the past, but I'm going to try it again. So I've just tightened this coffee filter down in the top of this jar. And the problem I've run into is that it doesn't drain super fast because the resin kind of clogs up the filter really well. You can also see down here, it's definitely letting some of that fine silt through. It's not as cloudy as this guy, so maybe a couple of passes through a couple of subsequent filters might do some good, but it's definitely whitish still. So, you know, these coffee filters are not really fine enough to get that powdered resin out entirely. So if you look at this guy here looks a little clearer than that guy there. You know, so just the second shot out of the siltation tube looks like it has less resin than running through a coffee filter here. But potentially a couple of different coffee filters in a row might help a little bit, because it's also looking a little less cloudy than that, I think. We'll find out after it all goes through. But you can see here the alcohol is going through really slow because I think this filter is getting clogged up with some resin particles. So right now, you know, it's just dripping, and yet there's a lot of alcohol sitting at the top there. It's not streaming through anymore. So I think that filter is essentially clogged up. And yet there's small enough particles going through that, this is not clear alcohol either. Alright, I have a second coffee filter in this jar. I'm going to throw in this stuff here, which is my second shot out of the filtration tube, or siltation tube. And it looks a lot clearer than the first shot. It's going through the filter a bit faster. Now, just because I say it's more clear doesn't mean it doesn't have any resin residue in there. You can see it's still cloudy. If we look in here, you can see that the alcohol there's still some in the bottom there. So as the level of alcohol goes down, the amount that pressure that flows through starts going down as well. But it's certainly flowing through a lot faster than this guy here, which is still dripping away. So the second shot definitely has less resin particles than the first shot did. So coffee filters are typically 10 to 15 micrometer sizes that lets through. You can buy 4 micron particle filter, so it's possible I could filter out this resin with a filter that's finer, but I'm not certain. I think that filter paper would get lodged and filled up with resin pretty fast. If I wanted to do serious filtration, I think I'm going to need a vacuum filtration system, because as you can see here, this thing here has tiny bit of alcohol in it, and this guy here is just plugged up. Alright, so this guy here has just a little bit of liquid in it still. Doesn't really look like there's a lot of resin caught in that filter, but obviously this looks a little bit less white than before, so I think it did filter a little bit out. But it's obviously, there's definitely resin in there still. Now this guy from the first shot just isn't flowing through anymore, and you can kind of see particles of resin just sitting up in the alcohol on the top, and the bottom definitely still has particles as well. I'm just going to let this sit for a day, and it's going to evaporate off a lot of alcohol, especially off the top there, but I'm just going to let it sit and see how it settles for a day. Well, this is interesting. It's been about an hour and 15 minutes. This guy here, which was my first shot, you can see that it's really settled out a whole bunch of kind of heavy particles here. Now my second shot is still cloudy. And down here you can see there's a lot of particulate matter trapped in the filter there. And the alcohol is slowly going through that filter, but it's been an hour and 15 minutes here. So it looks like my first shot really had a lot of the big particles in it. And up here it's actually more clear than over there. So it looks like the second shot was, the tiny particles. It's been about 3.5 hours, and you can definitely see there's silt at the bottom of this clear alcohol here. There's silt collecting there. The alcohol isn't fully clear here. So this guy has smaller particulates that are taking longer to come out. Looks like the bigger particulates have already come out at the bottom here, or been filtered out at the top there. So it's been about 6 hours since I poured these in. This guy here, the alcohol is quite clear above the sediment silt. Here I can actually see individual particles kind of floating around in there. It's cleared out quite a bit since I checked it last, and there's definite white powder on the bottom. Now I'm going to try pouring off the top here. I've tried this before in the larger container and it hasn't really gone well for me. Usually just the act of turning it sideways and pouring will kind of mix things up, but I'm going to give it a shot. Alright, so this was filtering the results of my first shot, and you can see this coffee filter definitely has collected some resin and stuff on it. That's compared to the filtering of the second shot, which really you can't really see much in there. Now we're going to try pouring this over very gently to see if I can leave some of the silt on the bottom. So the silt kind of fell, and it's not quite flowing, so I'm hopeful I can leave a lot of that in the container here. It's starting to inch towards the front though. Alright, that's about as much as I feel I can do. So I have a decent amount of alcohol in there, but you know, that's mostly the resin silt there. And what I poured off has some things in it, but it's not bad at all. Certainly reusable. Now this is from my second shot, and the silt in there is a little bit finer, I think. We'll see what happens when I go to pour that guy out. So some of that silt is floating on the surface instead of dropping to the bottom when it hits this edge here. A lot of it's dropping to the bottom. I do see visibly little pieces flowing out the top of the alcohol there, so I'm going to stop that about there. So you know there's definitely resin and alcohol in there as well. This guy here is a little bit cloudier than what came from that first shot, so I'm actually thinking the first shot had larger pieces of silt in it. Still, it's not bad. I think I can reuse this alcohol as well. So combined together from my 2 shots out of the bottom of the siltation tube, I got this much alcohol back. And I have these guys worth of waste besides what I spilled here and there and evaporated away. I don't know, you know, I left these things open. I don't know how much of this alcohol has evaporated away over the last 6 hours. It still kind of smells and feels like isopropyl alcohol. As for these guys here, I think it's time just to give up on the rest of the alcohol in there and just throw out any resin. I'm going to have to obviously rinse these guys out pretty well as well. So yeah, I poured that in. It's about 500 milliliters, and you know, it still has some resin in it, I'm sure, but it's looking pretty good. I'm thinking I can reuse that quite a bit. Plus, I have everything still left in the filtration tube. Okay, it's been 25 hours since I shot some silt out of the bottom of that thing yesterday. This time I have removed the cap from the top, so it's no vacuum. So the goal here is that when I open that valve, the liquid and any silt on the bottom will go straight out. Air will not bubble up, disturbing silt, and air from the top will fill in. So we're going to give this another shot. Alright, here goes nothing. Woohoo! Did a splash in there. On the plus side, there's very little silt left in this thing. It looks like I got most of it from yesterday. Okay, so without the lid on the top, it flowed very quickly. So not counting the stuff that splashed everywhere, this is the alcohol that came out of there. It's not perfectly clear. You can definitely see there's a cloudiness in there, but there's also, it's nowhere near as whitish as the stuff I got last night or yesterday. So I think the majority of the resin came out in my first couple of first couple of shots yesterday. Seeing as how relatively clear the alcohol that I got off the bottom of this tube was, I'm going to just dump the remaining little bit here in that container there, and hopefully it won't splash too much. We'll see how this works out. So this guy's gotten very difficult to turn, and I don't know if that's the alcohol is eating away at some type of rubber gasket, but it may be that this valve is not isopropyl alcohol safe, or it might just be that a 1.5 inch PVC valve is hard to turn. But it does seem to me to be harder than when I first purchased it. Okay, so the alcohol that I poured off the top bit of the tube here is quite clear, so I have improvements in my alcohol to resin percentage anyways. I think I've lost a bit of my alcohol through evaporation and spillage. So I started with this thing up at the max, so I've lost 500 milliliters in this whole process. Some of that I threw out when I was filtering things, but a lot of that was splashing and spilling. So this started out at 99%. I'm going to top it up with 91% alcohol. They say to use 93%, so I figure the mixture of this whole thing will still work pretty well. So this valve is definitely harder to turn than when I purchased it. I'm worried that the isopropyl alcohol is melting. It doesn't, PVC is isopropyl safe, but there's some type of maybe rubber gasket or something in there that it's melting and gumming up or something. I may have to get a 1.5 inch PVC pipe to threaded adapter of some sort and put a metal valve on the bottom to make this thing work permanently. Okay, I'm going to let this sit, come back, and see if we have any silt forming on the bottom. So this guy has been sitting in this container for another day. You can very faintly see there's a little bit of silt forming on the bottom, but it is nowhere near as bad as before. I don't have silt forming on the individual rings of this little basket, and it's not very high at all, so it's definitely better than it was before, and a lot of the resin has been filtered out of this guy. So this experiment went okay. I definitely got a lot of the resin out of my alcohol, so I can keep using that alcohol for washing parts. I'm a little worried about the PVC ball valve. All of my research into PVC pipe says it's A-OK for isopropyl alcohol, and even the type of rubber that they typically use in the ball valves for the seals or the packing material is supposed to be excellent for isopropyl alcohol, and yet that ball valve is getting real hard to turn. So I'm worried I might have to put some metal valve or something on to be able to keep using this like I'm doing. So this is a 1/2 inch hose bib. It's a 1/4 turn ball valve inside. It costs about $17. And this is a 1 1/2 inch to 1/2 inch threaded PVC adapter. So this is the exact same size as a 1 1/2 inch pipe, so it'll go inside any fitting that a 1 1/2 inch pipe would go into. The nice thing about it is it's nicely conical here, so any silt that goes down will be nicely dropped right into the bottom, and it screws into this guy here. You just need a little pipe thread for that. Also, I was actually impressed with how easily I could decant the alcohol off of the silt in those glass jars. I had trouble doing that with my big square mixing tank for the wash and cure station. So I think one of the things I want to do is buy a tall, really large graduated cylinder so that when I get the first batch of alcohol out of the tube, I can let it settle in that cylinder and then use that graduated cylinder to decant the alcohol off the top and see how that works for me. One other thing I've considered is actually purchasing a filtering setup with a filtering funnel and the filtering paper, so I can put a vacuum on the bottom and draw the alcohol through the filter a lot faster than just having gravity go through my coffee filter. So I'm going to experiment with this some more. You can probably expect a second video with, what really works well for me.